Right, we're joined now by development economist and investment banking executive, Nnaemeka Obiaraeri. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us on Newsnight tonight. Well, one of the four sins of the three banks that were, whose boards were removed includes, of course, regulatory non-compliance, corporate, governance failure, and involvement in activities that pose a threat to the financial stability of the country. And the question is, financial stability, is that not already the case? Isn't there financial instability already in Nigeria? And how will the removal of this board remedy this situation?
Ngozi, thanks for having me. Central Bank is very clear on what they did. They cited Section 12 of the Buffer 2020. And for the case of, there are three banks involved here: Union Bank, Keystone, and Polaris. For the case of Union Bank, just like it's a case of, Union Bank was acquired through a tender. Union Bank's share sales was between a private investor to another private investor. Basically, from what the central bank cited, they cited actions that had to do with affecting financial sector stability and then corporate governance issues. For the case of Union Bank, I think what the Central Bank of Nigeria is trying to do here is to trace the source of the funding that was used for the majority shareholding acquisition through tender. For the case of Polaris Bank and Keystone, it's very clear. There is nothing that is happening today that most of us who are professionals in the industry did not see. The acquisition of Polaris Bank and the Keystone has always been a hush-hush discussion within the circle that it was not properly done. Take, for instance, Polaris. Central Bank of Nigeria injected over 1.2 trillion into Polaris Bank. And out of the blues, we were told that an investor brought 50 billion to buy an asset, a company that had 1.2 trillion naira federal government injection into it through the central bank. And then they were supposed to pay for the remaining considerations over 20 years, which is very absurd. For the case of Keystone, it was very clear from ab initio that it was a case of financial engineering, that the term in and out, no single consideration was brought in. And what the Central Bank of Nigeria is trying to do is to tidy up the system and forestall such occurring in the longer term. But what worries me, Ngozi, beyond what the Central Bank of Nigeria has done, if we actually want to ensure stability of the financial, we must have to go all the whole hog to ensure that we put in place regulations, policies, and programs that does not endanger the financial stability of Nigerian banking industry. It's on record that Polaris was one of the banks where the federal government of Nigeria injected so much through the central bank. As of today, we have 350 debtors, obligors, that are holding 3.6 trillion naira of taxpayers' money through AMCON. AMCON is carrying over 4.4 trillion that have not yet been recovered over the last 10 years. And it's very worrisome. I think the central bank, in ensuring also financial stability, we must have to go all the hog to take drastic measures. If I am to suggest anybody who has a debt in AMCON should not have access to any credit or any financial service intervention in any Nigerian banking industry, be it national bank, international. Central bank should go all the hog, either by proxy, any company through which in which anybody whose name appeared in AMCON should not be allowed to have access to any credit in the financial service. And then the issue of the banks, central bank also should take serious step if we want to ensure financial stability, to ensure transparency. Central bank should also stop commercial banks from holding monies for state governments. JAG, FAC, and whatever revenues that are accruing to state governments and local government should either go to Nnaemeka Microfinance Bank, or the state government must be allowed to set up a statewide microfinance bank that should warehouse most of those monies. I tell you, the only way we can allow this industry to work is to inject sanity, inject confidence, inject transparency and honesty in activity. Central Bank has taken the right step, and kudos to them. And they should ensure, after this intervention, whatever process that will be involved in the resale of these banks must be very transparent. What happened to to Polaris and what happened to Keystone should not be allowed to repeat itself again. For Union Bank, we pray also that they should ensure the highest form of ethics in their investigation, and ensure let honest shareholders who were part of the Union Bank before the tender happened, not the investment be jeopardized. So I think it's a good step they've taken. They should stretch it all the hog.
Now that let me come in.
Strong role to play.
Now that they're trying that, you've asked that they stretch it. Let's see also if we can also stretch this a bit. Listening to you, one of the key things, key takeaways will be you're saying that these banks should, stop talking about patronage from states, local governments, and government agencies. It brings us back to core banking functions of our banks. And how well is the central bank ensuring that banks truly do what they need to do?
Let me tell you, the Central Bank of Nigeria is bank to governments and other banks. One of the greatest, see, if we want to fight corruption in this country, if we want to ensure financial sector stability, I have always posited 50% of the demand pressure on the dollar in Nigeria is corruption driven. Corruption driven from the federal to the state and local government. Go and look at the records. You will see clearly. Once they collect their FAC, they collect their JAC, they collect their IGR through commercial banks, they move after BDCs. They either launder the monies through BDCs or they launder it through real estate. Central Bank of Nigeria, as bankers to governments, should be the only banker to state government and local government. In fact, the Central Bank should go along all the way to ban governments keeping their monies with commercial banks. Any government, central bank should be the one banking the monies for governments, both state, federal and local government. In the other way, they can go put the monies in NISA. Central bank will have a watch over it. Or any state that does not want to go to NISA should have their own state microfinance bank that should warehouse their state FAC and JAC. And again, Central Bank of Nigeria should put a very wide eyes over it. Let me tell you, if the Central Bank of Nigeria want to fully ensure financial sector stability, a whole loads of work need to be done by Cardoso. Put an eye on all the banks that control the FAC, the JAC, and the IGRs. Look at the branches where they are warehoused. Look at their treasury. Trace the monies, track the monies. It is very shocking that in today's Nigeria, is over 28 million accounts do not have BVN, do not have NIN in them, which is very shocking. There is no account in Nigeria that should not have BVN, even TIN and NIN. In fact, central bank should even go the hog. Any bank where there is a trace of any account that does not have BVN, NIN and TIN, the MD should be removed.
Fantastic. Now, let's talk about the banking regulator, the Central Bank of Nigeria. A lot of people have asked, how did all of these infractions happen for so long? How do you ensure the full autonomy of the central bank, that it's not an appendage of the executive that may have led to these revelations that we're, well, unraveling now?
Ngozi, under Lamido Sanusi, even before Lamido Sanusi, Charles Oludo, the CBN was autonomous and independent. Even before Charles Oludo, the independence of the CBN was eroded in 2015. Go and check. 2014, 2015, and that is where we are today. The CBN left their role as monetary policy czars and entered into intervention in the physical sector, doing all manner of things, because these physical sector managers, both at the state and the federal government and local government, went to sleep. The autonomy of the CBN should not be something that should be discussed or debated. CBN all over the world is very autonomous and independent. The only place where the CBN was not independent was under Ugandan Idi Amin. One of the things that Bola Tinubu government should do for Nigeria as a legacy is to restore the independence of the CBN. In fact, the CBN governor should not be the chairman of the board of the CBN. We will have to amend the extant laws, the CBN Act, in such a way that there should be a chairman different from the CBN governor. In fact, the governor of the CBN and deputy governor should be like a collegiate thing. The CBN governor should not be an executive, just like the banking CEOs. The CBN should be made to be independent. There should, at least, even on the board of the CBN, there should be independent directors who are not answerable to the governor, who should also be like a checks and balances. Let me tell you, restoration of the autonomy and independence of the Bank of Nigeria is the only way we can ensure financial sector stability. And again, this idea that it's only bankers who have been in the system will make good CBN governors does not arise. Development economists should also be allowed to head the CBN. It doesn't matter whether the person was in the system or not. In fact, shielding the central bank leadership from the players from commercial banking sector will also go a long way in stopping regulatory capture. Because what we have seen clearly, people that played parts in commercial banking came to the Central Bank of Nigeria and saw it as an extension of their game in the commercial banking sector. Let me tell you, Ngozi, for us to reform Nigeria and bring transparency, we must go back to civil service reform. Orasanya report fully implemented. We must carry out massive reform in the finance services sector, the banking sector to be precise. In fact, the big banks, the national bank, government of Nigeria and the state, local, should not keep accounts with any commercial bank. Central bank should be the sole depository banker to these state governments, local government and federal government. If any state wants to maintain warehouse their money, it should go set up either a state microfinance where it should warehouse its funds and use it even as an encouragement for most of the SMEs in their state to have access to funding. This issue of having states maintain accounts with commercial banks, project account, jack account, IGR, is a precursor to corruption. The commercial banks in Nigeria are actually aiding those governors and local government chairmen to launder money, and that is why we are where we are today in Nigeria.
And that's what we have in this conversation. We'd like to thank you for your time. We really do hope that we'll bring you back again so that we can talk more on this, because as you said, banking is not about Osusu.
No, it's not.
I'd like to thank you very much.